Right.
This is Dan Schneider, and this is the fourth Dan Schneider video interview. The man you see on your screen is Gil Bruvel, a painter that I and my wife encountered a few months ago, and his work was so interesting and fascinating that I decided to see if he would want to sit for an interview, and here he is. So when we get back, we'll be talking for the next hour or so with Gil Bruvel about his life and his career in art. This is Dan Schneider again, and Gil Bruvel is my guest for this interview. He is an artist, a painter, and a sculptor whose work that my wife and I came across some months back. Gil, thank you for agreeing to be interviewed.
You're very welcome.
Gil, for the even a layman like myself or my wife, the obvious things that one sees are the very fluidity of the images, their fantastical nature. It recalls obviously some people like a Dali. For me, someone like an Escher. Also, a little bit of the fellow who did Alien, Giger. But there's also a sort of mythic quality to them. Let's before we get into your actual biography, just tell us a little bit about your art. You call your art a visionary. What is your artistic philosophy, and what is your approach to art in general?
Well, in terms of denomination, how is it that I, call my work? I never really call my work anything in particular, even though, like every other artist on the planet, I've had many influences, of course, until I developed my own style. And, I think we stay influenced, all of one's life, no doubt. But, visionary, magical, realism, surrealism. I think there are a lot of elements in there, and I think a lot of this denomination is more for, I guess, for the public. I think as an artist, I don't feel like I fit in any particular boxes. I mean, the art for me has been making art for me has been I guess a personal, with loving art, of course, as a child. And I think when you start really young and you have this natural attraction and desire to to these images that you see as a child, of course, there's things that naturally influence you. I think the surrealistic influence with Dali, for sure. First of all, I grew up in the south of France, so the Dali Museum was only a few hours away. And when I went into a study at the restoration workshop, the first thing the restoration did was to bring a lot of the people working at the restoration workshop to the Dali Museum, among many other museums. And I was just ecstatic, to experience firsthand some of these images. Somehow it just appealed to me. Then it was, the other surrealistic, like Max Ernst, and all of this school of artists that influenced me. In the same time, I've been creating artwork as a quest for creativity for 40 years, and I saw myself evolving, through different phases. I think what's going on on the outside, and particularly with the market, is that you see artists that are being promoted or seen or sold for a particular period, like the Kiriko, for instance, from the surrealistic period. He was doing his metaphysical painting, and he was basically essentially known for that. And then when he went to a different style through his own creative quest, then he wasn't really recognized by the critics, or when critics, are still some kind of importance at that time. So it's a constant evolution. It's not necessarily related to a market. It's a personal quest. So I think putting it to a rigid box, I guess, the public needs some points of references, and that's okay.
Gilles, let me ask you, you had mentioned getting into art as a child, and before we get into biographical details, I know when I first saw both your paintings and your sculptures, a thing that very few people tend to talk about is the tactile nature of painting and sculpting. And I got the sense when I saw your work that there was, even though most of the sculpture that I saw of yours was metal, there's the sense of a deep the brain and the body coming together. Maybe that was just something I imbued into it, but I got the sense that painting and sculpting for you is not necessarily just an idea, but it's also the idea coming from your mind into your body onto whatever the medium is. Is that correct? Would you say?
Yeah, oh yeah, very much so. I mean, I always saw the artwork, creating artwork for me as a very, it's about doing, it's about making the artwork. It's a very sensorial, meaning referring to the senses,
Yeah.
all the senses. And I feel that the having a maximum sensorial stimulation, versus a purely intellectual artwork that would exist in a very particular context, contextual art, which could be very interesting, but without a specific explanation, typically not coming from the artist or in a specific context, it's hardly noticeable. The art I create is more related to exactly what you described. Yeah, it's an extremely physical thing, linked with an intellectual and emotional stimulation. For the sculpture, even more so. If you were, I don't know if you were referring to the flow theory. It's this artwork created with all of this, lines, flow
Yeah.
lines. And part of the experience is cast in stainless steel, and part of the experience is to touch it. When you see art, art do not touch. Well, please touch. You got to experience it through your, sense of touch.
Yeah, when I saw the Flow series, it reminded me of films that I've seen of Detroit car makers where they test the aerodynamics of the cars. And you can see films of the slow motion of
Oh yeah.
high speed going
Oh yeah.
over something. Yeah, so that's what
Yeah.
it brought to mind. It's sort of like wind or the body being encompassed by something going by it.
Yeah, by flow.
Yeah,
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Yeah, well, that's the idea. Well, the concept behind the idea behind the what caused me to start to do this series was to combine an expression of one of the piece, in particular among the other pieces, called the wind, and it's basically a rather classical face, actually a torso, if you would. The shoulders here, and the head is slightly tilted, and the wind is the idea is a wind pushing against the face, and that is trying to express the sensation on the skin, pushing, creating these patterns of sensations. A little bit like when nature, the wind is blowing through trees or through the sand or the water. Over time is creating some kind of erosions. You have patterns. You have natural patterns that form by themselves. So this idea was with these ribbons, was to create the same type of process, I guess, through our sensations. That we can, I guess, relate to as every human being. We mostly experience our senses through The world, I'm sorry, the world through our senses.
Now, Gilles, looking through your own bio at your own website, which is bruvel.com, and there'll be a link to that website as well as your Facebook site and some other sites regarding your work below this interview. It says that you were born in Australia in '59 and your parents were French immigrants, and then you moved back to France. And it says that
Yeah,
your father was a well-known cabinet maker, so I guess that's where you got some of your tactile skill from. Uh,
yeah,
uh,
yeah,
tell,
very much.
tell me a bit about your parents. Were they was your mother an artist as well as your father?
Well, my whole family actually was more on the musical side. My mom was a piano teacher,
Uh-huh.
and my my dad was, playing piano, but I guess he created, this family. He needed to feed the family, and that's why I went to cabinet making.
Uh-huh.
And I have an older brother who is, well, was a very gifted, piano player, and at a very young age, he, showed incredible abilities for, playing piano, mostly classical. Uh, and decades later now, he's having playing in a jazz band. So he went through, different type of different style. But I lose myself in there. What was your question?
Oh no, that pretty much answers it. I see also that you had studied in a restoration workshop. So
Oh
you,
yeah, yeah, but yeah, you're right. But let me go back to my dad being a cabinet maker.
yeah,
So and that's, I think, is a kind of a key important part back then in hindsight, is that access to a workshop, and then eventually as we grew older, we were capable. First of all, our dad always encouraged us to, when I say us, is, my brother and I, to carve wood, and learning actually is a technique where you can take a piece of wood and trace a contour, and you cut it, trace a silhouette of what you want to do,
yeah.
and then like you start to like carve an elephant or a tiger, and so that basically taught me the basic of sculpting. And then he was doing also a lot of carving on his furnitures, different style of carving, and then we took on to that. And then there were also a lot of limestone in the area, so I took on also to stone carving. So that is to say that was an essential part to be able to, the idea of the maker. Now you have this current and this trend now. It's all, being a maker, you make things, Um, and because the range of what art is has expanded so much, that totally fit in, postmodern, idea of what art is. And so yeah, it's really key. I feel fortunate. And then to follow up with your next question about the restoration workshop, which I entered in this restoration workshop really young. It was very difficult actually to access it because I didn't have the required age, so I had
Yeah.
to go through, a special test to make sure I was, driven and determined enough and could pass a test to be accepted. And that further up my training, mostly in painting. I was already painting as a kid. I wanted to be a painter, 9 years old, I wanted to be a painter. I started took on oil painting when I was about 12 by asking my mom a oil paint box for my birthday. And so when I got into this restoration workshop, I was really young. I was 14 and a half, so I was really a baby. That really got me in depth and in touch with, techniques from 14th century paintings to all the way up to contemporary masters. And, studying and going through different, museum, different styles, studying not only the artwork itself, but also in which context. it was created, what materials they were using, and it's very specific, of course. So that really gave me a really deep understanding how to, put a painting together,
Yeah,
and all the components. Yeah.
yeah, it seems that that's almost like the old master apprentice kind of thing, and that you don't really see that much with modern painters. After you, how long were you in that restoration workshop, and then did you go to college and art school after?
No, no. The curriculum was 3.5 years, which I fully completed.
Uh-huh.
And wanting to be an artist, as I was going through the restoration workshop, I started to develop my own artwork, my own style. After hours, I was just, painting. They were also part of the training at the restoration workshop was to have live model, so there were a lot of practice drawing. And I see that back. Actually, I see this new generation of artists. They're extremely agile and knowledgeable about. I think I grew up through a phase where it was definitely not about technique, and I don't think it should be about technique. I think technique is just to express an idea. If it is too much about the technique, I mean, then what? It's not really. I mean, unless we're trying to convey a message specifically about that, it's more conveying of ideas. It's like a writer, you don't think about the syntax and your vocabulary, you already know it, and that's why you gain a lot of fluency, because you're not limited by what you can do. You always find a way to express an idea, because you know a lot of processes. You know a lot of ways to put things together.
Yeah, I know in looking at your work, you can see a multiplicity of influences, and there are certain things that I saw that go back even to someone like Bosch, and maybe even
Hmm.
some people before that. So let us end this segment, and when we do our next segment, let's talk about how your career got started and what it's been for these past few decades, and we'll do that in just a moment.
Sure.
Gilles, that was very interesting about your youth. In this segment, let us talk about your career as an artist. And before we get into your actual career, let's talk about how you got started. And in case there are any younger artists, painters, or sculptors that will watch this, maybe you can give a little bit of insight into how the art world works. So how does when you got started, and maybe it was different then than now, when you got started, is there a gallery system? Do you need an agent? Did you go around to art fairs? Did you start in the U.S. or abroad? Let's talk about how you actually got your foot in the door.
Sure. Yeah, well, I started in France. The restoration workshop was located in France, and I, as I was developing my own, expression, which was rather, traditional at the time. Just I was, learning the rope. Um, well, rapidly, I basically was in a situation where I really had to make a living, and so with a friend of mine from the restoration workshop who was making copies of the Van Gogh, paintings.
Yeah.
It was really good at it, actually, and then we found this location. It was an abandoned post office in Saint-Rémy-de-Provence in the south of France. And we find the owner, and he said, "Yeah, you can use it as long as you clean it up." And it was right on the main street at the time. And there's a lot of tourists in the summer going to Saint-Rémy, because this is Van Gogh Town, the asylum where he was staying at the time is in Saint-Rémy, and also it's an old Roman town, and you have like Roman ruins dating from way back. And so we put this show together, and on one side he was making his copy, selling, and copy of Van Gogh, and on my side I was putting my own artwork in a separate room, and it worked really well for both of us. And I was about 16 years old, and then I realized I could really make a living out of my work by what I was, producing and doing, and that was it. For me, it was there was never really going back, because I wanted to do that, and I felt that I had something to say, and I believe in myself, and so those are basically advice I would give to anybody would be willing to listen, is to be completely yourself, whatever your expression is, and to get good training. There's some incredible schools out there nowadays, everywhere, and then have something to say. Really work on that. It's all about what is it that you're saying, to create something interesting. And it's all, I think, it's the intent, is that what are we as artists, what are we really trying to do, and I think that should be really very strong focus. So I started my career, and then from then on I start to work with local galleries, and I start to come in the state only it's been a long time, that in '86.
Yeah.
And same thing, I found a dealer that was showing, that was opening a gallery in Laguna Beach, and he worked right away. Was showing a bunch of surrealistic work, what it was called, and he was a pretty good promoter, and we sold out. We sold out actually the show in 3 days.
Well, let me just ask you though, did you approach him with, say, pictures of, say, your top 20 or 30 paintings? I mean, how did you actually,
Yeah.
the mechanics?
Oh, well, the practical side of that was interesting, because first I met a art collector from Jacksonville, Florida, that was interested in my work, and it kind of gave me the confidence to be like, okay, yeah, sure, you could show your work here in the States, and probably would work. But in order to get to this gallery that actually it even opened, because I was and I'll explain, I was the first artist actually showed. I went through 821 galleries, and what that means, I went through all the galleries in New York, all the galleries. When I say all the galleries, I'm sure I skipped some of them.
Yeah.
It's most of the galleries.
Yeah.
All the galleries in Florida, Miami and Fort Lauderdale, and the place at the time mattered for that. Then I went to Los Angeles, and stayed in Venice Beach for about 4 months. And then this is where I found and so that I start to not be discouraged, but at the time, I was starting to run thin.
Yeah.
Money-wise,
Yes.
So I was like, okay, I guess I have to go back in France, not having, didn't find anybody. And so I went to there was one gallery on Rodeo Drive in Beverly Hills that was selling blue chip artists. And, I never really went there because I thought they would not be interested. I had not, I was a young artist, and, they were selling original Picassos and Chagall and, really expensive artwork. And so out of discouragement, I went there the day before leaving back home, and in France. And they were very nice. And they said, well, we're not interested here, but we have another gallery in Century City. And we're going to call this guy, and he will. I think he's opening a gallery in Laguna Beach, and he'll probably like your work. Well, lo and behold, I went there. They actually called, which was very nice. Went to Century City, which is 10 minutes away from Rodeo Drive, and he said, "Yeah, I love your stuff, and you'll be my first artist. I'm going to open my own gallery in Laguna Beach. You'll be my first artist." And so 6 months later, he opened the gallery. I did some more work in between. Left with him the artwork. It was really a leap of faith, actually, because I didn't really know this guy. And we 6 months later, I came back with new artwork. We set up the show, and in 3 days we sold out.
So
And
let's just ask one more like technical question about the art world, and then we'll get into your the actual art. So if you're young and you're starting out and you're having your first show, and let's say you have a work that's going to be an original sold for $10,000, what percentage does the artist get for that? And then as you 25, 30 years go by, and now you're a more name commodity, your work might an original might sell for 30 or 40 or 50,000. Do you get a higher percentage of what the dealer sells it for? Exactly how does that work so that people can understand a bit?
yeah, it really depends. It really depends the galleries that you work with, and also it depends, like you say, the amount of artwork you produce. Um, for instance, sculptures. I typically work with galleries that are willing to work with a different percentage, just because it's extremely costly to cast artwork in stainless steel.
Hmm.
It's really high-tech casting and all of that. And of course, galleries have also huge overhead, so it goes both ways. But I think there is a good in between to find.
So sculptures and paintings have different rates.
Well, for me, that's what I established for myself.
Yeah,
In order to have a practical system that work, and not as at one I rise of time as a sculptor, you got to run it like a business once you're out of the creative part, because there is a huge amount of investment. You got to create an inventory, you got to spread it. I mean, there's all kind of things related to creating sculptures that are very, very costly.
yeah,
And of course, every artist, I think, got to see it on both sides. Galleries invest a lot of money too. So I think once you there have a mutual understanding of both parties, then you can have a realistic discussion of what kind of deal you want to make with a gallery, and also what you got to offer. If you bring out already a market, and a name, well, all of that is negotiable, of course, and so that's how it works. I mean,
yeah,
there is a part. I think there is a part that's difficult for a young artist, and I went through it myself. Is that you eventually got to learn the rope about business. You got to make sure you protect yourself, not to be taken advantage of, and
yeah.
develop a good business sense and some kind of knowledge about how it works, all the moving parts.
Yeah. So now, when was your first show then in the States? Was this in the early '80s?
My first show as a solo show, I did show at one time with a French publisher, art publisher, that was doing at the time like Art Expo, and that was back in '86. And then my first solo show in Laguna Beach, I think, was Art Expo was in New York. My first solo show was 87, 88.
Yeah.
I would say 87, something like that. And he never stopped from there. So
So let's talk about the actual art then. So if we were to look back at the Bruvel art of the late '80s, then through the 90s and the 21st century till now. What has been the growth or the progression? Has your focus on what you had to say changed? Was your early art more inward directed and have become outward directed, or vice versa? Take us sort of through the 25, 30 year transformation, or where the art has
Right.
been.
Well, I think there's one thing with my work, the idea of, I see it as a big experiment, and I'm one of these artists has got lucky enough to keep making a living throughout these experiments, where people are actually interested. And one of the main focus, and I think that never really changed, it's like a natural curiosity about the world, at large, but specifically also about patterns in nature. And pattern in nature doesn't mean necessarily 2D patterns, but it could be also three-dimensional patterns and networks of things. So it can go, to illustrate with an example, it can go from, the growth of a seashell. Why is that it is growing this way? And the network of leaves on a tree, the patterns of the leaf itself, what it's being created, from rock formations to erosion to, microscopic photography to about cells and, things essentially produced by nature to, the larger scale, the immense scale of the structure of the universe, for instance. So there is an underlying thing about my work that is really related to shape. At one time, I focused at the beginning of my career, I think I focused a lot on the human form. I still do, but I think what's changed now, I'm kind of like focused on the more internal structure of the human form. And that's related to, creating sculptures related to sensations and, tactile, where you can use the actual touch. Another thing too that changed is like I went back to what I've learned earlier in my life. We're talking earlier. I went back to sculpture and to modeling in clay. To starting to learn about 3D modelings and things like that, So this is basically the same underlying interest that I have. I keep learning new tools, and in order to get for myself a bigger understanding or deeper understanding about nature. And of course, this is a classical example of the more I learn, the less I know. I know it's kind of a cliche, but it's true, and it's interesting because there's an humbling factor about it, and also a boosting of the desire to really get into deeper layers of understanding of how nature produces things, and the million different ways is, probably billions of different ways to being produced.
Yeah, well, that's a nice segue to my next question. What is the provenance of, say, each work of art? For example, most people looking at your work of art would say it's kind of dreamlike, sometimes nightmarish or whatnot. But is that something that does come from a dream or from a nightmare? Or could you be walking down a road and see a leaf falling from a tree, and just the way it flutters gives you an idea, and that might morph into something totally unrelated to the leaf? So, Gilles, let me ask the question about where is the provenance of your art? Does it come from a dreamlike state, which a lot of people would say your art is? Does it come from external things you might see that then get transformed into something on the canvas totally unrelated? What is the provenance of each work of art, whether it's sculpture or painting?
I think one of the first things that it'd be great actually to fall asleep and dream all of that, and I'm sure it plays apart, a dream, having a beautiful dream or a nightmare. Um, but I think most of the inspiration comes from really I mean, at least in my case, I'm not generalizing. It comes from the result of a natural curiosity, interest, observation, lots of observation, a lot of intent in understanding how things works, how things are put together. So the range is enormous. The idea of the tapping the unconscious, like the surrealist artist. The great thing about the intent, which is really nothing new, but I mean, because it was framed as a surrealist group, I mean, our artists, I think, always felt there was something there, could be used. I mean, absolutely no doubt, Now you have so much science behind the brain, the structure of the brain, how things are functioning, and a deeper understanding of nature, a slew of knowledge, how things are functioning, that, so one can go from automatic writing, like the surrealist, to, meditation techniques, to, the practice. Actually, that's something I need to talk about. The practice of meditation has been ongoing all of my life, because I, as a young age, I observed that as a radio noise in the brain recess, and then we learn about focus and concentration, and just observing without being caught into this flow of constant, thoughts. And just observe it and let it flow and let it go. Then we start to reach deeper layers of our brain, I guess, of our being. And I think this is where things get really interesting, where we start to go into deeper layers of who we are. And meditation does that, just because there is enough space within to actually observe it. And where in the past, artists were tapping into that, certainly. I think it's a natural ability of us as human beings to tap into that. So that is a big part of it for me. Combined with a big interest in everything around me, sensory stimulation. There's another thing. Actually, I was reading recently. It was about synesthesia. Synesthesia is it's a condition, overlapping of the senses. And I read a book actually on neuroscience. I was like, but wait a minute, I think I do have synesthesia, where in my case, of sound resulting in colors, as well as smells resulting in color. And I did a series actually of painting called the Scent series. And, it's about the human form, in this case portrait also. And within this portrait, there is this containing in the silhouette of them, this what this smells reduced into these colors and these sounds, so this is another exploration that is really recent. Until I thought it was a natural thing, until I read about it, and I'm like, okay, this is not a disease.
Now, Gil, let me ask you about this is the end of 2014, and so we're midway through the second decade of the 21st century. Two questions just to end this segment, and then we'll go on to some more philosophical questions in the next segment. But What has the internet, and specifically say your website, how has that helped your career in terms of getting your work out to people? And then secondly, where is the state of your art right now you'd be in your mid 50s or so, and where do you see it going, for the rest of your career? So let's deal with the internet and how that part first. How has that helped your career?
Sure. The internet, I think it's um, let's see, the internet is a wonderful thing. I mean, you can put your work out there. It's like a constantly accessible catalog, not only of your visual but also of your ideas, as well as Facebook and Twitters, I guess, or what all of these new medias. Um, Yeah, it's a wonderful thing. Absolutely. I think it's really important to be out there, to be accessible to the public. It's good for the galleries to have a an artist that is willing to put himself or herself out there and convey their message. Um, Absolutely. I mean, nothing like the real experience, seeing the real artwork.
Yeah.
But for the lack of traveling all the time and see everything all in the same time, it's a wonderful mean of showing what somebody has to say.
Yeah, I
So it's
know.
been
Yeah, I know what you mean. I once saw. I was a fan of the old Hudson School painter Frederick Edwin Church, and then about 15 years ago, I saw one of his huge paintings in person, and it's like 15 by 20 feet, or maybe 20 by 25 feet, and it's totally different because you can see the layers of paint. It's a 3D thing, and it's this huge thing, and it's like a totally different experience. And I know even just looking online at some of your paintings that I'd seen in galleries, it's a different thing. So let's talk about where you are now in your stage of your career. Say if you thought back 25, 30 years, are you about where you would want to be? Where do you want to go to in the remainder of your life, as a painter and an artist?
uh, right now as a painter and sculptures than painting what I call these wall sculptures. And there is a video actually that came out last week or a couple of weeks ago maybe, explaining the what I call the cubist theory, which is it's kind of a pun or kind of a bit of a joke because they're all made out of wood cubes, and so I use wood and resin to put these together. And I created this summer a new chess set, which is a piece of functional art. Um, and I wanted to create a three-dimensional board, like the checkerboard, And from then I did it, and you can see it in its video, and I'm sure on the internet also. And then I expanded upon the idea. I wanted to create these kind of like semi-abstract landscapes, or cityscape, depending really how you see it. And since it was not a board, like when it needs to be flat, because on the chessboard I put a piece of lucite where I can actually put the actual chess pieces. But underneath you have the board itself, which is three-dimensional. So when I realized I didn't have to be limited by the depth, I start to play with these depths and create different patterns that would combine together. And it was kind of and integrate these faces coming out of this, composition of different cubes shaped differently, all of them. So the reason I call it cubist is because I start with a cube and then I shape it.
Hmm.
And so this is what I'm doing right now. And as I'm working also on a new sculpture of the flow theory, which is an ongoing things, and as well as starting to work on a couple of new paintings. And this, well, the intent has not really changed. It's just getting stronger. These back to the internet. This constant access to knowledge. As long as we're not too distracted by it, I think it's extremely enriching to the creative input.
For those who are watching, just had a little technical problem with Skype with the last question, so I got most of Gilles' answer. In this segment, we just want to
Yeah.
ask Gilles a few questions about art in general, and then we'll wrap up and close the interview and give Gilles a few closing remarks. What I wanted to ask initially here was, do you think, and this is just sort of a philosophical question, do you think that your role as an artist has helped you communicate better with other people in your life outside of the arts? I mean, do you find that you are more at ease? Because there are a lot of people who are artists are very shy in their real life. Do you think that having become good at art, that you somehow, better at communicating in your daily life?
Becoming a better communicator.
Yeah.
You mean personally?
Yeah, on a personal
Um,
level, yeah.
well, I think art is a universal language, no doubt, when it comes down to expressing uh, ideas as an artist. I think there's a universality there that, obviously also goes across time. Personally, I think communication is something that needs to be, in some cases, taught or learned, and uh, and that would be my case. I mean, am I expressing myself better about my art verbally, vocally? Well, yes, because more and more people over the decade have been asking me, so I train myself to talk about it. But I don't think it necessarily, depending the people, of course, the artist, it does not necessarily comes naturally. But I think in the same time, it's a really big part of it. I think it's really important to be capable of talking about, you know, your art, your artwork, and what's really what's the intent? What is it that one is trying to express?
Another question that I've often wondered about, especially with a sculptor. Now you do metal sculpture. You're not doing chipping away things like a Rodin or a Michelangelo did. And I
Mhm.
remember there's a famous quote. I'm going to paraphrase it by Rodin that when he would see a block of marble or whatever, he could already see the sculpture within and just had to chip away the excess. Do you
Oh yeah,
find
that
do you?
was Michelangelo. That was Michelangelo,
Oh, it
actually.
was okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Sorry.
do you well another great sculptor, but do you have
Yeah.
that same kind of sense of what the painting or what the sculpture will be, and then when you're doing, whether it's the sculpture or doing the painting, are you just sort of uh, is the hard in other words, is the hard work done by having an ideation, a concept of what the art is, and then just putting it together is the easier part?
Yeah. Well, the best thing to do is an idea when one feel is mature enough to bring it out there. It has matured. It's time. I mean, I think it's instinct. You know, tells you that experience, I guess, to bring it out there. Sometimes it does come easily, and it comes well to really to express and show exactly what was seen and the idea behind it and all of that. And sometimes it's an improvisation. It's something that one put together, I put together, and I'm not really sure what I'm doing really. I have this diffuse idea, and it comes up. And in this case, it's also very interesting because the accident, things that we absolutely didn't think about um, before come about, and it's a sense of discovery and playfulness that is definitely needs to be paid attention to. This sense of freedom, and once again, it's just like the idea of a butterfly. if you find a beautiful idea and you know you don't want to crush it, so it needs to follow its own thing and find its own place in the production of your artwork, you know. So there is this delicate balance
And now,
of letting it be,
yeah,
you know.
with some of the sculptures, especially in the Flow series, they're of a human or humanoid faces. Are these faces that come to you? Do you use photographs? Do you use models? I mean, how do you, you know,
Yeah, I
do that?
use essentially models um, to inspire myself from these pieces, some specific features, and some of the artwork I want to do. I do not want to use a model because I don't want to be influenced. I have the very specific features I want to do, and I know enough about, you know, human anatomy and such that I can create my own faces. So it kind of really depends. What is it that I'm trying to say?
Let's just then ask you here, give you a closing statement on whatever you want about your life and art, Gilles.
Oh well, I like to be able to continue. Of course, what I love the most is to create artwork and you know the pursuit of the pursuit of happiness through creativity. It's a very fulfilling, full life, and you know, as long as I have good health and I can continue to do it, I'm extremely grateful for that.
Well, thank you for agreeing to be interviewed. For those who are interested in Gilles Bruvel's work, there will be links to both his website as well as his Facebook page underneath this YouTube video. So go there, check out his work. If you happen to be in a town where his stuff is being displayed, go and see his work as well. And for those of you who are interested in the interview series, we'll have a lot of other interesting artists and writers and thinkers coming up. Gilles, again, thank you for agreeing to be interviewed. And I think it's been a very productive interview, especially for people who are interested in your work specifically, but also generally in art and how to get involved in the arts.
Very well, thank you, Dan. Appreciate it. Have a
Okay,
great day.